Unitarian Universalism isn't easy to explain. Often people turn to our 7 principles to describe who we are. This Sunday, instead, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the 6 sources. And I realized attempting to cover all 6 sources in one sermon has created a little bit of a warp speed tour of Unitarian Universalism. So buckle up. This won't answer all the questions, but hopefully it will spark some curiosity about where it is that we come from. So first, a little historical context of where this list comes from. The first version of this list was adopted in 1961 when the Unitarians and the Universalists merged into one denomination. Before that, they existed separately for a good 100 years. When the two merged, they decided to create a single document that outlined their core values and what traditions they embraced. That document gave them a sense of unity, but it took a while to get there. They argued for a solid year about exactly what it should include. In 1981, the document was revised and pretty dramatically altered. Replacing that one single document, this new version split principles from the sources in 2 different lists. The principles explain how we aim to treat one another and the world around us, and the sources identify all the roots of our tradition. The 1981 version passed nearly unanimously. The same version of the principles and sources lives on today with as much support as it has ever had. The principles celebrate our aspirations for the world, while the sources point to our foundations. So the first stone of the foundation of our tradition is direct experience of the transcending mystery and wonder. Personal faith begins with experience, not with good arguments. Unitarian Universalists often talk about experiencing that sense of awe in nature. I've heard people talk about connecting with the California redwoods and grasping their size and the tremendous history of those trees begins to place us in a much broader web of life. Others of us occasionally get to drive down to the Pacific Ocean as it emerges in full view. We see the vast expanse and reconnect with the earth. We get reminded of our splendid little lives. Some of us experience the sacred in music or in other artistic expressions, either creating music or enjoying music that's been created for us. We get to enjoy human creativity and the vastness of our emotional range, or just delight in something pretty. Transcendent experience can be found in meditation, it can be found in reading, even in a beam of sunlight cast in the right angle at just the right moment. There are so many different ways we encounter the sacred. Life isn't all sunshine and rainbows, we know that. Moments of loss, suffering, heartbreak. Those difficult moments also remind us of the preciousness of life. They instill in us a yearning for a better way. Over and over again, these experiences of life add up to shape our faith. Every person experiences the holy personally and directly. And that may seem obvious to us, but it's an unusual idea for a faith tradition. Our first source isn't a sacred text that was written down and stayed the same for thousands of years. Our first source isn't a tradition or what some ancient sage said. The first source of our faith is an individual's direct experience, your direct experience. It's available to each and every person from the time we're really quite young. It's not limited by gender or race or sexual orientation. The sacred doesn't speak a particular language or live in a particular place. You don't need to have a theology degree or have read any particular book to have an opinion worth sharing. Because our you faith starts with experience. The second source of our tradition is words and deeds of prophetic women and men, which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. These folks have risen up in every age. Some of them we know from history as revered heroes. The vast majority of prophetic women and men, however, become anonymous with the passage of time. They used the life they were given, helping as they could, to bend the moral arc of the universe toward justice. Part of that prophetic leadership is charisma. It's that piece of personality that draws people in and inspires them. But more than their personality, prophetic leaders have a grounding and a commitment about them. Gandhi called it satyagraha. Satya means truth, agraha means firmly holding. Prophetic leaders have a strong grasp of truth and a commitment to good in the world. When you know you're living with the truth, anything can be possible. The extreme example of this sort of commitment can be heard in the courage of Gandhi as he said, "They may torture my body, break my bones, even kill me. Then they'll have my dead body, but not my obedience." That's a deep faith, an unyielding commitment to truth. For Gandhi and many other justice makers who have shaped the world by aligning themselves with truth, it mattered more than life itself to them. That alignment with truth empowered them to change the world in ways no one ever thought possible. And we get to learn from those justice makers as we find our role to play in the struggle. Now, an unyielding commitment to the truth can be a dangerous thing. It can be fundamentalism or radicalism. We always temper our commitment to truth with love. The next source of our tradition is Jewish and Christian teachings which call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbors as ourselves. If you take a close look, Jesus demanded a pretty radical and transforming love, both in human relationship and in relationship with God. When people first encounter Unitarian Universalism, they often wonder about our relationship with Christianity and how we understand the Bible. Even among Christians, there's a huge spectrum about how the Bible should be understood or used. We draw on those two traditions of Judaism and Christianity, mostly in relation to their core teaching of love. I told this story a couple of months ago when we were talking about the Golden Rule. Once a great Jewish teacher, Hillel, was challenged to summarize all of the teaching of the Torah to be able to say it while standing on one foot. Hillel responded, "What is hateful to you, do not do to your fellows. This is the whole Torah. The rest is explanation." Similarly, a skeptic asked Jesus, of all those stories that he told and all those guidelines for good living, what's the really number one important rule? And Jesus answered, "You should love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself." In the Christian tradition, that's usually referred to as the Great Commandment. The Jewish and Christian traditions are filled with wonderful stories of wisdom and courage. They come up in our worship services and in our justice work. Our children learn these stories in their religious education classes. At their root, though, is struggle to connect with the sacred and to love one another more fully. So when the question arises, to what extent do we embrace Christian teachings, or how do we Unitarian Universalists interpret the Bible? We can safely say that we embrace those traditions to the extent that they lead us to deepening our relationship with the sacred and to loving our neighbors more fully. The rest, as they say, is icing on the cake. Of course, Judaism and Christianity aren't the only religious traditions that we draw from. The next in our list of sources says that we draw wisdom from the world's religions, which inspire us in ethical and spiritual life. We seek wisdom far and wide, rather than assuming that we already possess it or that it's the province of some people, some cultures, some religions, and not others. Unitarian Universalist minister Jacob Trapp described the world religions like strings on a harp, each with a distinctive note, but not the same note, each one addressing a unique human dilemma, asking different questions about the meaning, purpose, and challenge of life, and arriving at different compelling answers. This tradition of reaching out for truth goes way, way back for Unitarians. Ralph Waldo Emerson and his Unitarian transcendentalist peers dove into the Hindu sacred texts all the way back in the early 1800s. And you can trace that strain of Hinduism into their theology and most of our Unitarian Universalist beliefs today. Today, in just about every Unitarian Universalist congregation, we find people who not only come from other faith traditions, but they also maintain some of those beliefs and practices as they participate here in our community. And we UU ministers do our best to honestly and respectfully incorporate what we can from world religions in our Sunday services. Now, this is a little bit hard to describe, but our openness to all of those sources of truth is actually an outgrowth of universalism. If you remember, or this may be new to you, universalism, that's a part of our name, historically was about universal salvation. Our predecessors believed that no loving God would condemn anyone to eternal punishment. If God is loving, then salvation must be universal for all people. Opening the door to universal salvation, saying that all people are saved, then open the door to all those people having some pretty good version of the truth. You see, if all people are saved, that suggests that all people, all cultures, and their own insights had something of great value. Today, we don't focus so much on the business of heaven and hell. Today, we focus more simply on the idea that love wins, and we're all in this together. We're all in this mixed up spiritual journey of life together. So why not learn what we can from each other along the way? The source of our tradition that you probably lean on the most in your daily life is humanism. Humanism teaches us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science. and warns us against idolatries of the mind and spirit. They believe in the ability of science to describe the world around us. Both hard sciences and social sciences have supplied us with understanding of the universe that's actually pretty incredible. We're no longer beholden to mythical explanations for natural events. No longer do we derive our ethics from theological speculation. But through reason and through experimentation, we have the means to search for answers for ourselves. And those answers can't be ignored in religious life. What's true in a house of worship must reflect what's also true in a classroom or in the laboratory. Humanists believe, we believe, that science and reason can't be ignored in church. In addition to invoking science and reason, humanism reminds us that the role of religion is to support humanity, not the other way around. You might compare it to putting humans at the center of things. Just like Copernicus discovered the heliocentric solar system, it was revolutionary when he realized that the sun was at the center, not the earth. It totally transformed the way we understood our place in the world. In religious life, the humanist twist is just as revolutionary. Humanists believe that the worth and dignity of every person is of supreme importance. It should be the center of concern, not speculation about God or adherence to ancient myths. Humanists remind us that religion is helpful and meaningful and true only to the extent that it helps us live our lives. Religion exists for people, not the other way around. Putting humans at the center of religion was a revolution in religious life in the mid-20th century. But now, as planet Earth begins to fight back after all we've put her through, we're seeing need for another shift in perspective. The final source of our tradition is spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions which celebrate the sacred circle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. Annie Dillard wrote it this way. She writes, "At a certain point, you say to the woods, to the sea, to the mountains, the world, now I'm ready. Now I will stop and be wholly attentive. You empty yourself and wait, listening." Annie Dillard knew what some of our forebears knew, that nature itself is a scripture to be read and studied and understood. The cathedral that provides us with the most profound inspiration may be the world of nature. For at least the past few thousand years, in an effort to improve our own lives, we humans have tried to gain control over the forces of nature, and to a shocking degree, we've succeeded. We have harnessed the flows of rivers and extracted what was useful from beneath the soil. We've used innovation to reap tremendous harvests of food, all to realize there must be a greater goal than hoarding this abundance for ourselves. We must change our relationship with the earth. We must reawaken a humility and reverence for the very source of our lives. These most ancient of religious virtues, reverence and humility, are no longer nice, feel-good goals. Reverence and humility are probably necessary for our human survival on this planet. I told you this faith of ours is difficult to describe succinctly. It can be overwhelming to grapple with the full breadth of Unitarian Universalist sources. If we take a small step back, though, a trend emerges. Over the past 200 years, we've sought wisdom wherever it could be found, adapting what we know to the challenges of each new decade. It's our turn now to do likewise, rooted in those sources of our tradition and reaching out to embrace the wisdom that brings hope and inspiration to our lives. Amen.